And good morning, everybody. We're live. It is Friday. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Glad you're here. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and I am with the Food Leadership Group. And if you are here, you are joining us for the Food Safety Chat Live. This is a show we do every Friday, and we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And we talk about all things food safety. And if you're new to this, number one, welcome. We're glad to have you. And one of the things that you're going to notice is that this is not a presentation. This is a real live discussion about topics around food safety. And I bring in a new expert every week to kind of talk with him about the latest trends and what's going on. And today is one of my favorite guests is Shawn Stevens from the Food Industry Council. How are you doing today, Shawn?
I'm great. How are you, Bryan?
Oh, not too bad. Beautiful, beautiful day yesterday in Colorado. I think it's going to be a little windier here today, they said, but it's still going to be around 70 degrees. So spring has finally arrived.
Send some of it our way to the Midwest. We need it.
Yeah, I have friends in Wyoming, and they got a pretty good snowstorm here recently, and they were showing pictures of drifted in areas and all kinds of crazy stuff up there. So
yeah, don't send that.
No, we don't need that. So one of the things we like to do here, right, is we want this interactive. And so you'll notice in the chat, so my assistant Renee is here. Good morning, Renee, my friend. Tell us where you're at in the world. I'm in Loveland, Colorado, and Shawn is in beautiful Wisconsin, which I love to go to. I worked in the dairy industry a long time. So I spent my fair share of time in Wisconsin. Tim, great to see you here. Always nice to see Tim. And that's kind of the show. One of the things that we do like to do, everybody, when we start is to have a little ceremony together and share a ritual drink with us. I have coffee. What do you got, Shawn?
Coffee.
As far as we know, that's coffee.
No,
everybody
know it's right. Coffee.
Very good. Very, very good. Corey, good morning. So fellow Wisconsin with Corey over in Milwaukee. And Jill, we got the contingency there. Looks like Jill is in Wisconsin today as well too. Awesome, awesome. So one of the things before we start the show is I want to give you a huge shout out with the Food Industry Council and the work you guys have done there. And one of the great tools that Shawn has put together, if you don't know about this, I tell everybody I can about this. He has put together on his site, and here's the link that I put into the live stream here, to a site where you can do food recall searches. So if you work in the industry and you're trying to find out what different trends are going on and things like that, sometimes going through the information on the FDA website is not the easiest thing in the world. So Shawn has put together an amazing tool where you can search recalls by year and type and class and allergens, you name it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. So if you didn't know about it before, you need to use it. So thank you, Shawn, for putting that up.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you. Yeah, we're really happy and proud with what we've done, and it's a great tool for the industry.
So for some reason the link didn't work here. So let me try here. I'll take off the recall off the end of the link. So it's Food Industry Council, and that's COUNSEL, so like a lawyer.com.
You can also get to it by www.foodrecallreporter.com.
Did not know that.
Food Recall Reporter. So that's a database of all recalls, class 1, 2, and 3 for FDA and USDA of food and pet food, human food and pet food since 2000.
And that second site you said was what?
www.foodrecallreporter.com.
Foodrecallreporter.com. Great. All right, got those in there. So as Shawn and I were discussing the topic for today's show, there's some things that have been catching everybody's attention. And one of these is we're seeing what seems like a lot of recalls, but it seems like a lot of repetition of recalls. We've heard FDA say, hey, listen, COVID's winding down. We used to be doing a lot of virtual visits, not a lot of plant visits, especially unannounced. We would let people know we were coming. And be warned, we're going to be out there visiting you. And so FDA's activity is definitely up, but it also seems like in pair with that, recalls are up too. So of course, everybody's seeing the Lucky Charms thing, Shawn. It's like, wow, what is going on with that?
Yeah, if we just kind of take a step back and we look sort of on the journey that we've been over the course of the last 20 years, there's always sort of a cluster of recalls that are really high profile every few years. And it's kind of started out with beef in the beginning, right? E. coli 015787 in ground beef, and everybody thought everything was right. All the only problems that existed were linked to raw animal products. And then suddenly, somehow, the E. coli got from the beef into the leafy greens, right? The fields where the leafy greens were grown. I remember getting a call from Bill Marler in the 20 years ago, saying, "Hey, Shawn, I'm standing here in a romaine field or lettuce field in Salinas Valley, and there's the lettuce is all around me, and I'm looking up on the hill, and there's a whole bunch of cattle, right? Those days." And then it was quiet for a little bit, and then we saw another explosion with new and different products sort of being associated with pathogens and outbreaks and recalls because of pathogens. And it's just sort of this cyclical. We're kind of flowing, and I think we're entering one of those periods now where we're seeing a number of sort of higher profile recalls again bubbling to the surface. And whether it's packaged salads or what's in the news today, Lucky Charms, or some of the other high profile things that are happening. And what's interesting to me is we haven't kind of figured out how to stop that cycle, right?
Yeah.
To make those issues kind of go away. And these shortly, I'm certain, will kind of fade into the rearview mirror. But then, in another 9 months, 12 months, there'll be sort of another cluster, and we'll see it happen all over. But Lucky Charms is we're not at a recall yet. There are a lot of people talking about whether a recall may happen. What we do know is there, at least in the beginning, there is a relatively limited number of folks who were complaining about this particular product. That relatively limited number began to grow. We saw reports of illness on various websites. I think I Was Poisoned is a portal that consumers can access to report what they believe is a illness associated with a product or an experience at a restaurant. And FDA is monitoring that as well. FDA is just as interested as what's happening there as many consumers. And as the numbers of complaints began to sort of grow, FDA became more and more interested. Now, we don't know how many complaints FDA has received itself. We don't know whether General Mills has received any complaints. I suspect they likely have, but we don't know. And then we have to ask ourselves what's going on behind the scenes. And clearly, there's been a lot of investigative work that has been performed both by the company and also by the FDA. And it seems like, at least at this point, there are still no clear answers.
Well, that's always been kind of the difficult thing, right? So as somebody who's worked on the manufacturing side, running quality assurance at companies and things like this, when a big recall happens, you'll hear, all these people are getting sick from this particular event. But the follow-up piece of it, usually you don't find out what actually happened to fix it, which I would love to know, because if something large like this happens, I want to look at my processes and say, okay, what lessons can we learn from this to not repeat what they did? So I think a lot of ways that kind of hurts industry.
Yeah. I stepping just off to the side for one moment. I'm a big advocate and should continue to be, and I'd ask you to be as well for all the reasons you just stated. I think industry would really benefit if following, these higher profile, where an outbreak is associated with the product, conclusively, or there is a very, very large recall for driven by things like pathogens, where FDA would do what NTSB does when there's an airline crash, or an aircraft crash, and issue a report. And it can be relatively sterilized. So confidential information isn't being shared, but to say, listen, this is the circumstances leading up to the event. This is the event. This is what happened. This is what was put in place to, fix it. And, we would all, I think, benefit from that. But it'll be interesting to see here, what ultimately this ongoing investigation ultimately shows. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it was 2014, when many of us were just scratching our heads and perplexed when we saw at least whispers of a large-scale listeria outbreak, including some deaths that were associated with a product that had never been known to make people sick, and that was caramel apples. And just we couldn't figure it out. Apples are dipped in 180 degree or more, 200 degree caramel, and it should kill, right? Whatever is on the surface of the apple. And we learned a lot, in a relatively short period of time. Maybe it was about 3 or 4 months before finally, I think Kathleen Glass at the University of Wisconsin did a study and said, wow, when we stick that stick in the apple and the juices are released, any listeria on the surface is protected, when the apple is dipped, and then it has food, right, to feed on. And if we're not refrigerating it, that can cause problems. So, who knows what this investigation might tell us that we didn't think of yet, right? Something that, we always like to think that we figured it all out, and we know where the risks are and what the risks are, and where they're coming from. And, even there's oftentimes discussion about, there's a lot of emerging pathogens out there that may, be making people sick today or in the future. We're not talking about it. We're not testing for it. It may be out there. If you look at the, big six non-0157 S-techs, right, that were probably causing at least some illness over time, but nobody was looking for it. So who knows what, and this could prove really to be nothing. We're all, I think, scratching our heads at this point, trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I love the analogy of the National Transportation Safety Board, right? Because when airline or a crash happens, right? Think back like with Kobe Bryant, when that happened, right? We got a report and everybody in the country knew, this was tied with the weather conditions and where the pilot was flying. And, then they can attribute issues associated with that. So I think that's a fantastic analogy because I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and as a pilot, those things are useful to me because I don't want to repeat the mistakes that, caused other people to crash into the sides of mountains. And as a food safety professional, I could take that 1-page report or 2-page report, 3 of them, carry it to the CEO's office and say, okay, this is what happened to these 3 companies. And we're kind of seeing the same trends happening in our, on our processing floor, intermittent findings of listeria, right? And we need some additional resources so that we don't end up as one of these. Oh, wow, okay, yeah, no problem. But we don't have those tools right now, right?
Exactly. Yeah, because part of this, right, as people who are really dialed in with food safety, and a lot of our guests here on the show with us, Corey, for example, who's talking about, kids dying gets the attention of FDA, right? We're seeing this with the infant formula issue going on. But it just seems like we all scratch our heads, Shawn, and say, every year it's about the same amount of illnesses and deaths and recalls and allergens and these type of things. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's 2 factors. I think the first is our ability to see what's happening is increasing, almost exponentially every year. So our surveillance is getting better. If I look back to 2003, we had a total of, let's look at 2006. We had a total of 137 recalls of FDA and USDA regulated products, only 137 total. And, in 2006, it might have seemed like a lot of recalls of food products. Oh my goodness, almost 150 food products had to be brought back because they might kill somebody or hurt somebody. But, 2016, only 10 years later, we're up at, almost 850. What drove that? Well, there's a few things. Surveillance got better, as we transitioned from ground beef to leafy greens to other products. Industry got skittish, and customers began mandating that their suppliers test ingredients or test food products. Okay, we'll test it, but nobody was holding it. So those products were being shipped, and now they have to be recalled. Food companies, in response to FSMA, frankly, in response to PCA, they got real skittish. A lot of testing started happening, and people see the results, right, instead of throwing them in the garbage. And all of those things the more you look, the more you find. So, surveillance gets better. We see more, emerging outbreaks. FDA, with FSMA and its new authority and powers, starts going out and conducting swabathons. They're finding more Listeria facilities that, facilities maybe weren't looking for or weren't finding. Companies are doing more testing. And I think overall, just the visibility of food safety has increased every single year. It's got more and more and more attention, more and more important. And as it gets more attention, we do more testing. FDA is spreading its wings further. We're going to see more and more companies kind of swept up into, that vacuum of the recall show. And so that, I think, is one driver. Another driver, though, at the same time, is we're not really necessarily, as an industry, we're not quickly doing enough, I think, to respond to the causes of outbreaks. So are we responding to the causes of outbreaks? Are we doing things a little differently? Over long periods of time, I would say yes. Mm-hmm. Our behavior and our practices over the course of a decade have clearly changed. Okay. But it has been a very slow and methodical process. Okay. We gotta test the environment. What do you mean we gotta test the environment? It's just important. Other companies are doing it. We should test the environment for Listeria. Yeah, but we never tested the environment. We've been doing this for 40 years. We've never been testing for Listeria. We've never had a problem. Just please test. What if we do it once a quarter? Okay, fine. We'll take 5 samples a quarter from the processing room floor. 2 years later, I really think we should, the FDA guidance came out. I think maybe we should be doing some more, and there's some Listeria outbreaks. And so let's test, 20 samples a quarter, or, now we're going to do 5 samples monthly. Mm-hmm. And it's just been this slow walk into, kind of being dragged along by your ear. But, also there's very few companies, there's some, hands down, but there's very few companies who've just been like, all right, what do we need to do right now if we want to make sure that we never ship any product that has a pathogen like Listeria? Well, let's either demand COAs from all our suppliers, or we'll test the incoming ingredients. Nobody's going to test the incoming ingredients. Very few will. Then once we're, mixing the batches, we're going to serial sample before it, goes into as it's coming out of the mixer. Mm-hmm. And we're going to sample every, 15 minutes. Well, I don't know if 15 minutes is enough because it can squeeze through. You're right. You know what? Let's sample every 5 minutes. Let's pull little snips, and we'll do a composite, and we'll send that to the lab, and we'll do it every day. And then we're going to sample the food contact surfaces. And let's do, every batch, let's do a dozen. And then we're going to sample the finished product, right? If we want to find it, we can find it. We can. Now, we're probably not going to make any money, and we're going to throw a lot of product away, and that's why we're not doing it. So, that's one of the problems is we know it's going to be there on occasion. We still don't want to find it. Mm-hmm. And we're afraid. We're afraid to test the way that we should if we really do want to find it. And even if we did test to that extent, we can't afford it. Yeah. The margins on food are too small. So we're left in this kind of crazy, netherland where we're trying to do enough to kind of give us a sense of assurance, but not too much, right, to put us over the line where we're not able to ship any product anymore because, too much is testing positive. And then, of course, there's if we test the environment too much, or if we test too many finished products and it's positive for a particular pathogen, FDA is going to come in during the next inspection and see that we had 40 environmentals or 40 finished product tests, and they're gonna smack us alongside the head with it. Right. So we're in this kind of very fearful, apprehensive stage of food safety where we finally dragged enough companies along to begin doing what needs to be done, but we're just beginning. Does that make sense?
Well, no, I think that's a really good observation, and to kind of reflect that back on you, right? Number one is, right, so FDA has said through FSMA, and we worked in industry to make this happen, was flexibility, right? Hey, listen, FDA, as you're building these regs around FSMA, everybody does things a little differently. We're making different products. We have different equipment. We have different environments. You need to allow us to kind of look at our systems and figure out the best way to do it. And then you can come in and see what we did. And FDA went, okay, great. And I think what you're touching on here on the manufacturing side is an important issue in that who's designing these things may not be the right person to design it, right? Because if you're a quality manager, it's not like you go to college to become a quality manager, right? A lot of times you just kind of fall into that role, right? You're working in the plant or things like that, and an opening happens and boom, you become quality manager. And now you have to set up these programs and figure out all these rules and all these regulations and things like that. And everybody in the plant already has enough to do, right? You're the quality manager. You got lots of stuff going on. You're trying to manage the training programs and the quality systems and the documentation and the testing and all those things that you were talking about, Shawn. It's a ton on their plate. They're not sitting around going, how many environmental samples should I do this month? Right? They're following the plan.
Right. And that's a great point, because they're really, their focus is tasks. What are the tasks that I have to complete to do my job, right? Yeah. And they're, all those things are most cases, very well defined. I need to do my, pre-shipment review. I need to make sure everybody's filling out the records the right way. I need to make sure the GMP checklists are being filled out. I need to, pull my random sampling list of sites and go and make sure we collect those samples. I got to make sure they make it to the lab, and I got to make sure they get entered into the LIMS system. Or if I don't have a LIMS system, the spreadsheet that I'll never look at again. And all those things. But when there's a positive, a lot of the folks who are, in QA, their expertise is not finding a niche, pathogen in the environment or finding where Listeria may be resident. Right. It's sort of something that they're told they have to do, but nobody really knows how to do it.
That's a good point. As we were preparing for this call, one of the analogies we were kind of working over with this, which I think works really well, is as a homeowner, right? Let's say that I'm sitting in front of the TV, Shawn, and I'm watching. All of a sudden, I see a cockroach scurry down along the wall. I'm like, right?
We're not watching TV at my house.
Yeah, and so I go and I get that critter and I kill it, and I'm like, okay, what the heck was that, right?
Yep.
You hope the wife doesn't see it, and you're like, all right, back to normal. And now all of a sudden, it happens again, and you're like, oh my God, right? What do you do at that point? Do you start researching chemicals and patterns of cockroaches and the best places to look for them and chemical applications and go get your license? No.
You mean in our spare time when we're doing all these other things?
Yeah, when you're mowing the lawn and everything else. No, you're not. You're going to call a pest control company and say, hey, listen, oh my God, I got this problem. Get out to my house. I need some help. Right. And they're going to go everywhere. And they're going to say, oh, yeah, cockroaches love these type of environments. And they're probably up here. And let's put some traps here and let's find out what's going on. Let's do an analysis of your location. And we're going to figure out how they're getting in and how to get rid of it. Right.
Right.
That's exactly what we're doing in a plant with our environmental monitoring. Are we, to your point, are we appropriately trained on that process of seeking and destroying?
Right. I'd say the answer is in most cases, no.
Yeah.
And there are lots and lots of experts out there. This is all they do. And I think we as industry could do a much better job of leveraging that expertise and bringing those folks into our facilities to help us when we do identify, intermittent findings of Listeria. And I'll tell you as an aside, years and years and years ago, I didn't advocate it because I, like the rest of everybody, was terrified of what, additional data and, how it could be used against a company. But we're now living in a world where we need additional data. We need as much data as we can possibly collect. And there are no limits. So we, in a lot of instances, we're using different types of strain typing, ranging from ribotyping to, as very, sort of the most simple, all the way up to, in some cases, WGS. As you get more advanced, you get more expensive too, right? So you have to kind of balance, what makes sense. But, use ribotyping as an example. It's pretty good to give you a pretty good idea whether, a particular strain is reappearing over and over and over again in a facility. And you find another one and it's different, clearly. It can help you identify whether what I'm seeing is transient or whether it, is matching something that I saw last month. Well, now I know I may have a resident, I may have a niche. What do I do about it? And in a lot of cases, companies they become paralyzed at that point. It's somewhere in the facility. Could be in the walls, could be in the ceilings, it could be wicking out of the concrete, it could be buried deep inside a bowl chopper, it could be, who knows. So, and the QA folks, and even folks with food science degrees, if they're not exercising it on a regular basis, and frankly, I hope you're not on a regular basis, on a daily basis over the course of 10 years looking for niche organisms in your facility, because that means you haven't found them yet. But they're just not doing it on a that's not the focus of their job. And there is expertise out there, and maybe we can create more expertise, right, by whether through its training programs or otherwise, to teach the folks who are in charge of food safety and QA really how these bugs, to your point, like the cockroaches, to become the cockroach expert, just as expert as anybody else, so that those things can be identified, found, and eliminated, hopefully once and for all.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of times, if you have a hit in the plant, and you'll start thinking about it and doing a vector analysis of, all right, where did this come from, right? Yeah, normally you come up with the same areas. You're going to say, okay, how about forklift wheels? Maybe it's coming in over by this door, right? And then you kind of go through that motion and you clean where you found it, you sample those other sites, and you declare victory. And it's kind of like, really? Is that true? Now, part of this too, and something I always like to bring up on this call, is FDA has changed their approach too, because to your point, Shawn, in the past, it was always, okay, we're going to test drains. We might do some floor stuff. We're never, ever, ever going to go anywhere near equipment for our testing program. And the theory is that, okay, well, if we test these collection points in our plant and it's not there, well, everything else is fine. And FDA is like, no, right? And when you look at Chapter 4 in their new inspection operations manual around environmental monitoring, they are now focusing on zone 1s and 2s. So they're like, no, we need to look at direct contact surfaces. And we've seen recent recall examples where FDA has asked companies, they didn't have to force them, to recall materials based upon that environmental testing. Nothing in product, but on direct and indirect contacts.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the lesson we've also learned, over the course of the last decade, I think, is if Listeria is in the food processing environment, clearly if it's in a zone 2, I would say if it's anywhere in the food processing environment, and it's showing up in places that we're, swabbing, it's also showing up in places that we're not swabbing. It's not there just because we found it there. It's there because it was there. And that we happened to, swab the location where it already was. So, if, I can put 250, got a paper clip laying around here somewhere. I can put 250,000 cells on the head of a paper clip. And if I hold it up and I just sneeze, right, it's all over the room.
Yeah.
It's on the conveyor belt, it's on food contact surfaces, and it's the stark reality of what we're dealing with here. And I think, we, as an industry, we sort of tolerated the existence to a certain extent of Listeria in the processing environment, or salmonella in some cases, depending on the product. And what FDA is saying now is we can't tolerate that anymore, because people are gonna get sick. And if we look at at least 50% of the recalls that have happened and or outbreaks, and frankly all the examples that we started talking about this morning, that have occurred over the course of last year, they all involve products that are contaminated, recalls for pathogens, contaminated with pathogens over multiple days, multiple weeks, multiple months, and in some cases multiple years, right? And what that tells FDA is, if it's in the facility, and especially if we find it twice, you're going to make people sick, and we need to step in and do something about it.
Right. And now FDA too, right? Going back to the database, right? So CDC, last I heard, was well over 1 million isolates that have been identified and put into that CDC database. So when FDA comes out and does their environmental sampling, they're cross-checking against that to say, okay, are there reports of illnesses in the past linked to the samples that we have that match what we're finding in this facility? Right. So I've seen instances where they've gone back years now on that data and matched that up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we all have more risk today than we've ever had before.
Yeah. So I think, right. And so it kind of comes back to the operational view of, and we've seen this all through our careers. I know that it's been said to me, and I probably said it myself, is, if we look hard enough, of course, we're going to find it. It's just going to be there. Right. And that, I don't think that attitude flies anymore.
No, it doesn't. We'd love it if it did. And like I said, that's how we kind of all grew up. But what we're now learning is, we should be looking for it. We'll probably find it on occasion, not because it should be there, but if we do, something went wrong. Mm-hmm. And we need to do something to fix it.
Yep.
Get rid of it.
Yeah, totally agree. Because really, when you step back and look at a company, right? So the company making the half and half in my coffee or things like that this morning, it's what are companies actually focused on, right? If you're the CEO or you're on the leadership team for the company, what are you focused on, right? You're focused on producing and selling product, right? That's your goal.
Right.
And the people in most cases that run companies, right, they come through the sales group or the marketing or maybe finance. It's very rarely where you see somebody from operations and quality, right, who rises to that rank in companies. It doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I'd even, go so far to say operations is, in many cases, quality's worst nightmare. Mm-hmm. Operations would, in some cases wants to, they got to meet those orders. They got to get the volume out, right? And as a result, we don't have 8 hours for sanitation today. We've got 5.5. Mm-hmm. Use it, right? And now we've lost 2.5 hours of sanitation so that we can, run a little longer. All the above.
Well,
everybody is the enemy of food safety and quality, it seems.
Yeah, well, that's the difficult part, right? Is if you're running a food company, right, and let's say that you have a busy time at Christmas, right? That's your busy time of year, and you need to crank out the product to get to those little kids, and all these type of things. And to your point, right, things get compressed. It's like, okay, we'll worry about sanitation, doing this thing later. Preventive maintenance, we'll have to put that off until after the holidays because we got product to get out the door. And if something happens, guess what? That's the time it's going to happen, right?
Right.
The reason it happens is because of that situation. That's when you actually need to be paying more attention to those type of things because people are tired and people are working hard. They're working overtime. They're getting product out the door. That's the most dangerous time you have.
Absolutely.
Right? If you think you can just go, shoo, okay, well, we'll worry about this later. No.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of examples we see with recalls is, the companies are, so I think we've touched on a lot. It's this kind of concept that FDA gave us of self-regulate, or not self-regulation, but self-enforcement.
Yeah.
Self-regulation. We're writing the food safety plans in our facilities, right? So, and we're able to be creative, so we can decide whether we want to test just a little bit or not test at all. Well, we have tested a little bit, but we could be testing for just generic coliforms and right there, stop. Or APC stop, right? Or we could take it and test for Listeria species if that's a risk. But we have that ability to decide for ourselves what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And a lot of companies, they don't care. They know what they need to do to produce a safe product, and they're gonna test. They're gonna have a robust program. And they're gonna do well. Those companies sometimes still will get surprised with product contamination or whatever the case may be. But you have other companies that take advantage of the flexibility that's been imparted by the agency, and they say, well, to my point earlier, we have a great environmental sampling program. We're collecting 10 samples every 3 months off the processing floor, and they've always been negative. Like, okay, it's great for the moment you're collecting the samples and getting your test results, but what about the other, the rest of the 3 months? And that's in their minds sufficient. And they've, again, never had a problem with pathogens, or they've never had an issue until the FDA shows up and they find 10% of their samples are testing positive. So, so this flexibility that's been imparted in the industry, I think, is, created a lot of opportunities for companies to do great things, but a lot of opportunities for companies to, like I, noted earlier, being pulled by the ear slowly, towards the ultimate goal of food safety. And then, I do think when we look at the root cause of recalls, it's culture based. It's, our ability to sort of self-regulate, a lack of appreciation or understanding of how quickly pathogens can, like a cancer, spread through a facility and wreak havoc on everything. And once it's spread everywhere, it's very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to eliminate. And if the agency had, this is just thinking out loud, but if the agency had come, we're pontificating at this point, but instead of saying we're going to give you flexibility, we're going to mandate that all companies test their environment weekly. All companies test zone 1 food contact surfaces while they're producing. All companies test finished products. And oh, by the way, all companies will tell us, they'll report through a portal when you have a positive, either in your environmentals or your finished product or your, that may change the way that companies behave. Probably a lot more fraud, unfortunately. But you have a lot of companies that would kind of step up and they'd stop, sampling once every 3 months. So a lot of what's driving what we're seeing is both what's happening within industry, but also the rules under which that we're being, that are being published by the agency and how they're being interpreted by the industry. Now, I'll tell you, when FDA comes into a facility, and you're right, what the rules say and what they do are, it's kind of two different things, because when they show up, the expectation is, we gave you, flexibility. How you chose to use that is up to you, but we're going to be testing your zone 1 and your zone 2s. And if you neglected to do that yourself, well, you're probably in a world of hurt, because we're going to start seeing things that you should have caught before we got here. And that's where sometimes this disconnect is between companies who have been scoring a 95 on their audits, their GFSI audits for the last 5 years. They're like, hey, yeah, we're the greatest company since sliced bread. Oh, and we make sliced bread too. But FDA comes in and, they find that the listeria crawling all over the place, or salmonella. Well, now what? Company's surprised. They should have known better, but they didn't. And a lot of companies don't.
Yeah, I think a lot of this, right, is what I always rail against is there's a false belief in companies, especially people who aren't close to it, that past results equals future results, right? And I'll hear it in the phrase along the lines of, like you said, well, we never had a problem before, right? Therefore, so what you're telling me is we're not going to have a problem in the future. That's pretty amazing. How did you figure that out? Or they work in an industry that they think is safe, right? And every year we found new examples of how bacteria have figured out a way to survive in those products. And if it's something that's used as a base ingredient in multiple products, man, you got a big problem, right? So peanut butter, right, with PCA, flour, right? We were all very surprised when we started seeing all these hits in flour and all the different products that was going in. And, bacteria are very resilient. And if you think that your industry is safe, it's probably not.
Yeah, as a general one said, the folks that scare me most are those who said we've been doing it this way forever, or we've always been doing it this way.
Right.
And, it's like everything in life, at every moment we should be thinking about how can we change in a way that is positive, that, gets us a better result. And if we're stagnant, I like to say in the business world, if you're not growing, you're going to die, or you're dying. And same is true if, in the QA department, if we're not growing, and growing doesn't necessarily need to mean budget or size, but if we're not growing and learning and trying new things and, using new technologies and new approaches, we may eventually fall way too far behind, and, the skies will close in around us. Right. So yeah, all of us, we just got to keep pushing ourselves and challenging the way we think too. Right. My philosophy and my view of, pathogens in the food processing environment is probably a complete 180 from what it was, just 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to kind of, think, have an open mind and listen and, challenge our own beliefs.
Right. Because I think a lot of it too, because part of this is human nature, right, Shawn? In that if something does happen, people want to blame somebody, right? It's like, oh, we had this big problem. It's the quality manager's fault. Oh, we had this recall. It's the supplier's fault. Oh, we had all of these recalls. It's FDA's fault. And that's not the case, right?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, look back. I mean, so generally on the regulatory side of things, a large event will happen and FDA acts under Congress, right? Because Congress will get pressure. So like think of FSMA. It's like, oh my gosh, we need to update these systems and this is terrible. We need to act now. And so then Congress will push something through, pass a law, and then it goes to FDA to create those regulations. And that's what we saw with FSMA. But we've got enough experience now under our belt, right? As we're looking back at this and saying, okay, did this really help, right? Did FSMA really help? And therefore, if another crisis happens and we go through this same mechanism again and say, okay, well, we're going to give FDA all this power and that's going to solve the problem. No, it's not, right? It's a joint effort. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, when FSMA was first passed, the analogy that I used is if we've got a speeding problem on a particular road, right? Because there just has never been a speed limit sign. So everybody's, they're driving too fast. And let's say it's a long kind of rural road. They're doing 60 down it, but there's, a school nearby or kids waiting for a bus every morning. So we put up, what are we going to do in response to that? We're going to create FSMA. We're going to put up a speed limit sign that's, says 25 miles per hour. Boom, 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 right? And they're every, 300 feet.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 out of 100 drivers is going to follow that speed limit, and the other 99, or maybe they won't do 60, but they're going to be doing 50.
Right.
So just putting up a sign isn't going to do anything, or saying, hey, write a written food safety program. Okay, whatever. What are we doing? All right, I'm just going to record it here. And I have to do this thing that says a hazard analysis. Okay, I know how to spell that. And yes, no, yes, whatever. I go online, I look for a template, and, I cut and paste, I put in some stuff, and it looks good.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. In a lot of cases. And the more sophisticated companies with more resources already were operating under some form of HACCP, right? So it was just a function of changing the semantics in their program. So nothing really changed there. But, in small and medium-sized companies, it's just all right. And they'd have usually, they're either their head of production or maybe a QA person who would be responsible for, putting the program in place. And they'd go to the PCQI training, get their training certificate, and go back to the facility and just, cobble together some kind of program. But how they operated didn't change. I mean, in most cases.
Yeah.
It's just it's just what they wrote on the paper. So FDA realized that that there was, simply requiring food companies to create these plans, these programs, wasn't going to really do jack. And, frankly, I'm aware of a couple instances, but in the vast majority of instances where companies, who are importing, for example, importing products from overseas, they're required to have a food safety verification plan or foreign supplier verification plan, and they'll make the plan, fit the supplier. They've got their supplier. They want their supplier. They're going to buy from that supplier, and they'll make the plan fit the supplier. Okay, what did we accomplish? Nothing. We just had this cool little document that says FSVP program. So the FDA realized shortly after, they started drafting the regulations. Let's see, the law was signed by Obama in 2011, January 2015, maybe the first regulations, 14, started coming out, and they're being put into place. So about the same time, then what was it? DOJ came out and announced, FDA sort of partnered with DOJ, and DOJ said, and if we look at FSMA, the whole, I often say what FSMA is the FDA, or I'm sorry, Congress telling FDA to make foodborne illness stop.
Yeah.
Right. And now that's FDA telling the industry, make foodborne illness stop. So DOJ stands up in 2014, and maybe I should give the agency a little more credit. I think some of the regulations were being published a little bit earlier, but it was a long process, and the agency was spending a lot of time and thought into what was most appropriate.
Mhm.
with the opportunity to comment from the industry and everything else. So DOJ steps in shoulder to shoulder with FDA and says, listen, we are going to bring criminal charges. We're going to at least look whether, there's a basis for criminal charges when food companies produce food that make people sick.
Mhm.
And suddenly, you saw a lot of people sitting up a little taller in their chair and saying, "Oh, well, I don't want to go to jail for driving 35 in that 25." And suddenly, we had maybe not one person out of 100 following the speed limit sign, but we dropped down to 45 out of 100 were following the sign, right, and not speeding anymore. So it
Mhm.
had an effect, and I think FDA was smart by putting some teeth behind the regulation by saying, if you have flexibility, but if you produce a product that puts somebody in the hospital or worse kills them, we're not tolerating that anymore. That's not acceptable. And
Right.
the FDA investigative unit and DOJ are going to look very, very closely at whether somebody should be held criminally, liable for that or accountable. And when we look at the criminal sanctions that are available to DOJ, a misdemeanor, right? I think it's some places, I don't know, it's a misdemeanor to like jaywalk. Uh,
Mhm.
Maybe not quite that level, but if I'm in the outside, screaming at the top of my lungs because the music's good and I'm in, New Orleans, maybe it's disorderly conduct. I don't know. Maybe it's a misdemeanor, but it's also a misdemeanor if we make people sick or kill people. But that misdemeanor, under DOJ and federal standards, can put us in prison for 1 year for every count. So for
Yeah.
every ice cream cone that I sold that made somebody sick, I can spend a year in jail. So it makes it very easy for DOJ to bring criminal charges. So that was kind of the, you got the carrot. We're going to educate before we regulate, says FDA, and then you
Mhm.
have the stick with DOJ saying, if you're not willing to become educated, we've got something else in store for you.
Right. And I think too, that's a good point with the education. I think this kind of brings it back to what we were talking about at the beginning. There is a tremendous burden. If you're managing food safety in a company, a tremendous burden, right? And you've got all kinds of different things going on. And maybe, and this is just me thinking out loud too, right? Is with that blame piece of it, right? It's a joint effort. It's not FDA's fault. It's not industry's fault. It's definitely not the consumer's fault. But we need to be working together on these things. And maybe like the pest control example, maybe we need outside expertise in these areas to figure out if we do get a hit, where it's coming from in these type of activities. And we saw in the industry with Global Food Safety Initiative, right? That was created by the retailers saying, hey, enough, right? We need to create some new standards here to increase our level of food safety for the products we're buying from you guys. So let's put this program in place, right? And I think overall it's been pretty successful in helping to bring these things down and get them more under control. But again, right, if I'm in the plant and I have environmental hits, I may not be the right expert, right? So maybe, and this is something, right? I'm throwing this idea out here. Anybody who may be able to help with this, because we're all in food safety together, is maybe like third-party audits. We need outside expertise, right? So if I'm a quality manager and I have my environmental monitoring program, and I find some environmental hits, and now I've got to figure out where it's coming from, how to eradicate it, and things like this. Bringing in outside expertise and that fresh set of eyes to look at things, right? Because that's just human nature. When you're in a plant, you walk by the same equipment every day, right? You wash your hands in the sink and you go out on the floor and you got your hairnet and you walk by that machine and you never give it a second thought, right? How is it being cleaned? What's sitting underneath of it? What is being washed up underneath when the guys are cleaning? What is happening, right? And bringing in that outside expertise, just like a pest control company in your house, right? To get rid of those cockroaches. Maybe that's a program that we can look at. And what if that entire environmental monitoring program was a third party process that was linked in with the retailers and said, okay, if you want to manufacture our private labels, or if you want to sell to us, you need to have this rigorous environmental monitoring program created by a third party. And oh, by the way, we're going to see the results.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, I think,
hello, right?
um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you're a large retailer, that may not be a bad idea. Now you're spending a lot more money to manage something that the manufacturers should be managing themselves, but maybe you make them pay for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
you arrange for the service. The third party comes in and conducts sampling, and maybe they manage that program entirely. And they'll come in once weekly announced, and they'll sample, and that definitely would put give companies incentive to ensure that they're managing their production such that they have enough time for cleaning and sanitation, and that they're doing a good job. Right? These are all great ideas, and I think this concept of taking because it really, when you think about it, collecting a sample and sending to lab doesn't require a tremendous amount of expertise. Knowing where to sample does. Knowing what to do when there's a positive does. Knowing where to look, how the particular pathogen behaves in the type of environment in which you operate does require expertise. And that's the type of expertise that simply, frankly, companies aren't in the business of searching for and destroying and eliminating listeria. They're just not. They're in the business of making pizza and making really tasty pizza.
And I've seen this time and time again in manufacturing. Is a company buys equipment because it fits their process, right? It's like, okay, this pizza making piece of equipment is going to run at this rate. It's going to produce this many pizzas. We'll be able to pay it off in this period of time. All right, let's buy this. Let's buy this piece of equipment. And then the quality guy takes a look at the equipment afterwards and says, how do we clean this?
Right.
And they're like, what are you talking about? No, you figure it out. Right.
Yeah. You're the QA guy. And they're stuck. Right. And now they've bought a nice piece of equipment, but they may have bought $1 million recall too in 5 years. So, I think we're really onto something here about this concept of, outside expertise to help manage environmental monitoring, as well as finding niche organisms in the environment. And, if that could be modeled and made, cost effective, I think it could be tremendously successful. What we're living in now is food companies tend to manage their environmental monitoring control themselves. They have their, QA staff who, in many cases, are very good at doing QA stuff, but they're not listeria hunters. And when there is a positive, they do what they read about in the guidance, or they recall, they think they may remember from college, and they do a little bit of vector sampling, and it's over. And then when the problem gets really big, and there's either a recall and or FDA comes in and does an inspection and threatens to a warning letter, then they bring in one of the nationally regarded listeria experts who charge $500 an hour plus including travel time to come in and charge $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 to try to find where that organism was living that caused all this chaos. Whereas I would anticipate for far less money, you could have folks coming in, doing routine sampling, and trying to solve the problem for like a monthly subscription fee or whatever the case may be. To your point, Bryan, just like pest control, a little more expensive than pest control, but so is the sometimes hundreds of thousands, if not more, dollars that companies pay for in testing. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So companies generally, right, I don't think I've actually ever seen an example where this wasn't the case, right? You hire an outside pest control company to come in and manage your pest control system. Imagine if the quality manager had to go around and say, well, yes, okay, I've done my research on flying insects, and I know that these particular pheromones are effective, so I'm going to place traps in these area. And look at these egress positions here within this plant where rodents can get in. And I know the seasonality because we're in a rural area, right? That becomes your full-time job, right? How would you do anything else, right? It's the same with environmental monitoring. And to Austin's point, right? This is how siloing works, right? Because part of, I think, where we're hurting ourselves in the industry is, to your example, with the National Transportation Safety Board and airline crashes. I need that information, right? So I don't need the details. I don't need confidential information. What I do need to know is, hey, heads up, there was an issue that occurred with this particular style of equipment. Here's an alert. You need to modify your cleaning processes to make sure you get this. Oh, holy crap. I didn't even think about that. Right.
Right.
And now we're improving, right? We're learning from the mistakes of others,
right?
But everything is chopped up, right? If you have a problem in a plant, You're not going out and saying, hey, I had a problem and I fixed it. Everybody come look at what I did. No, we
No,
don't do that.
we don't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't have a
Huge
problem. What are you talking about?
Yeah, huge
Everything's
problem.
fine.
Right. So,
No
so
way.
I think, right, to kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level is, right, this is a joint effort, right? Creating onerous regulatory laws where FDA comes in a command and control environment and specifies everything you do doesn't work, because there's always going to be things in between that you should be doing. But well, FDA didn't tell me to do that, right? It's the speed limit example sign, right? So if we put up a bunch of speed limit signs and nobody's following it, now the city council says, all right, fine, we're going to post a cop there every day. And that kind of works where the cop is. You're like, okay, well, we need 2 cops and 10 cops. And, pretty soon you're in a totally untenable position. That doesn't work, right? The other side of it is industry working alone, individually, trying to solve this problem in their little bushel basket and not telling anyone else what's going on doesn't work either, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the consumers are the ones that suffer, right? And so something hits like this weird Lucky Charms thing, where 6,400 people are self-reporting that they're having an issue. Why, right? And we still don't know what's going on with this.
Right.
It's going to come out at some point, and then what are we going to do with that? Right? And what caused that? How do we improve? And I think that's the big piece that we're missing.
Well, I think we should continue to advocate and push for some type of, and there can be a threshold for the size of the recall and or all, outbreaks, but push for, the agencies to, following their investigations, their inspections, the closeout, to publish a summary of, what happened, what was the cause, root source, whatever you call it, and what was done or what needs to be done to ensure it doesn't reoccur. Not, company specific, but just industry wide. These are the types of steps that companies should be taking to ensure that this isn't repeated. I think it would be tremendously helpful for the industry. That's I guess number one. Then number two, this concept, which really is new. Food safety culture was new in the food industry when, Frank Yanis and others started talking about it, a number of years ago. This concept of, recognizing, I think that's the first step, is to recognize you have a problem, right?
Right. Yeah,
Can't solve it. But we do have a problem. We do have a problem in food facilities between the leadership and also not in all cases, but in some cases, the folks who are running food safety just don't have the expertise or the tools. It's maybe not their fault,
or even the time. Yeah.
I've been doing this for 2 decades and more than 2 decades, and I may have a couple ideas on where listeria might be coming from, but I am not a listeria expert. And
Right.
the last thing you want to do is listen to the lawyer about how to eradicate a listeria from your facility. So those folks with expertise and maybe thinking about this is maybe we don't have to manage this as part of our internal QA group. Maybe there's others who are, better suited to, we're not going to ask the QA group to get rid of the rough welds.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've never welded before. Okay. I mean, okay. And so your analogies are great, Bryan. And I really think, that this might be onto something here with this sort of concept of we need to bring in more expertise to help, and not the $500 an hour expertise, but something that is more systematic, right, in routine.
No, I agree. So in closing, right, I think, we've identified here some amazing things to think about. And I think this is a perfect example of how we need to collaborate around food safety, right? Don't try to do everything on your own. Talk about these examples and how we can work on these. And again, congratulations of taking the time and being here live with us and listening to this information. So hopefully Shawn and I have given you something to think about here this week of, okay, great. How can I improve? How can I become more involved? How can I share the information I have so that everybody else can improve as well? Because food safety is not a point of competition. And get out there and learn and grow your perspective. And my sponsor, EAS Consulting Group, has some amazing training programs that you can check out. And if you take a look at them, you can get 15% off if you put my name, Bryan, in the checkout. And now you're helping your company financially as well too, and you're learning. So don't feel, right? I think that's the overall message here too with this, Shawn, is don't feel like you have to do all of this on your own. Nobody can do that, right? Nobody's an expert in everything, right? There's certain things that I excel in. There's certain things that Shawn excels in. You're the same, right? So know your strengths and don't have such a big ego that you don't realize that there are other people who are stronger in other areas, right? Don't let your ego do that to you. So Renee's put some links in there for EAS. Thank you, Renee. Don't know what I'd do without him. He's a great guy. So with that, I want to thank you, Shawn. Amazing, amazing talk. Hopefully we've given people a lot to think about. I know that I do, right? So we can always get better. We can always improve. And I think we've started down a path here of a potential area where things can be improved. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'd just say we're all responsible for the health of the world. And it's a pretty good feeling.
Absolutely. 100%. So everybody, thank you again for joining us. We will be back here next week on Friday at the same time. And we live stream on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So please join us at 8 a.m. Mountain, 10 a.m. Eastern, again, for the next food safety chat. So always a pleasure having you on. Shawn, thank you very much for taking the time. And thank you everybody for joining with us. And we will see you back here next week. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Get out and enjoy it. Bye.